Family, welcome back to the Royal Sussex Squad, your safe space where we uplift Prince Harry and Meghan, call out hypocrisy and shine a bright light on the truth that so many refuse to acknowledge. And today, buckle up because we're diving into this shocking and frankly humiliating circus that unfolded during Donald Trump's recent state visit to the UK. Now let me tell you, the coverage of this visit was nothing short of explosive, and the way the Windsors allowed themselves to be used as props has sparked outrage across the globe. Now, before we go any further, I want you to really picture this. A state visit that looks less like diplomacy and more like a grand coronation staged for a man who thrives on vanity, chaos and destruction. We're talking about a man who has openly disrespected NATO, insulted allies, and made it his mission to dismantle every piece of progress achieved in the post-war era. And yet, here comes the UK, rolling out the red carpet so extravagantly that even people who have watched royal pomp for decades are saying, this went too far. Trump was celebrated like some conquering king. And the sad truth is that the monarchy, already weakened by its own scandals, found itself being rented out like a political prop. The Royalist Substack piece by Tom Sykes nailed it when he said Britain debased itself, prostituting its traditions to soothe Trump's ego. Strong words, yes, but accurate. And let's be real, this kind of grovelling spectacle cheapens the very idea of monarchy itself. But here's what I really want to highlight. Notice how Harry and Meghan are always dragged through the mud by the British media, constantly accused of debasing the monarchy, of commercialising the crown, of somehow sullying tradition because they chose freedom, independence and dignity. But look at what just happened. The entire institution literally bent over backwards to glorify a man who has spent years cozying up to dictators, a man whose reputation for corruption and scandal is worldwide. If that isn't debasing the monarchy, then what is? Now, I'm not saying Charles had full control here. We know Downing Street and Starmer's government had their hands all over this. But Charles was the one out there, front and centre, standing beside Trump as though the UK was crowning him instead of merely hosting him. And let's not ignore the irony. Not long ago, Charles's courtiers were whispering about President Biden's age and health, trying to make him look weak because he didn't attend the coronation. They briefed the press to paint Biden as too old, too frail. And yet now, after 19 months of cancer treatment, Charles himself has visibly struggled with health, while Trump, pumped full of who knows what, appeared more robust. That's not me being cruel, that's pointing out the sheer hypocrisy. When it suits them, they mock someone else's health. But when the mirror turns back on them, suddenly it's silence. Suddenly it's dignity. And the British press, the same tabloids that rip Meghan to shreds for daring to launch a brand, for daring to breathe, they're quiet as mice when Charles debases himself to play host to a man who embodies everything rotten about modern politics. Let's talk about the theatrics. This spectacle was said to rival even Queen Elizabeth II's funeral in scale. Think about that. A funeral for a beloved monarch who reigned for 70 years, the woman who anchored the entire institution, and they're saying this Trump spectacle matched it in pomp. That alone tells you how badly Britain was willing to humiliate itself. And for what? To stroke Trump's ego, to beg for favour from a man who has done nothing for Britain, nothing for Europe, and frankly, nothing for humanity except enrich himself. And here's the thing, family. This is what exposes the truth about how the monarchy is used. When Harry and Meghan chose to step away, it wasn't because they disrespected tradition. No. It was because tradition itself has become a bargaining chip, auctioned off to whoever Downing Street or the palace thinks will help them hold on to relevance or power. That's not dignity. That's not stability. That's desperation. And let's never forget how the media twists the narrative. Harry and Meghan were accused of using their royal titles when they signed with Netflix or Spotify. They were told they were cashing in, debasing the crown, destroying tradition. But what about this? What about hiring out the monarch like a glorified escort to entertain the whims of Trump? Where are the outraged Daily Mail headlines? Where's the pearl clutching from the royal rota? Oh, they're silent, because hypocrisy is their currency. The truth is, Harry and Meghan stood up for themselves and refused to be used as props. They left because they understood that their value was not in being rented out to boost the egos of politicians or to distract the public from government failures. Their value is in their humanity, in their work, in their love for each other and their children. That's why the establishment hates them, because their dignity shines a light on the monarchy's compromises. Now let's step back for a moment. Some analysts say Starmer and other European leaders have learned to manipulate Trump by feeding his vanity. And maybe that's true. Maybe treating him like a king is their strategy to keep him manageable. But let's be honest, that strategy may keep the peace in the short term, but it exposes just how weak and compromised Britain has become on the world stage. If the only way you can deal with a leader is by humiliating yourself, then you're not leading. You're grovelling. And once again, let's contrast this with Harry and Meghan. They've stood on international stages, at the Invictus Games, at global conferences, at humanitarian events, and they have never had to debase themselves. People respect them because they carry themselves with authenticity. They don't need choreographed pomp to be taken seriously. They don't need to be rented out by governments desperate for influence. Their presence commands respect because they've earned it. Meanwhile, the monarchy, so obsessed with preserving its image, has revealed more about its weakness in this one Trump spectacle than Harry and Meghan ever could. The institution was laid bare, stripped of dignity, stripped of independence, reduced to a prop in someone else's performance. And yet, you won't hear the tabloids talk about this. You won't hear the royal experts wring their hands over this, because their job isn't to tell the truth, it's to protect the institution, even when it's embarrassing itself on a global stage. And family, this is why the Sussex Squad matters, because we see through the hypocrisy. We see through the lies. We know who really carries themselves with dignity, and we will always call out the double standards. So let me ask you this. If Britain can hire out its monarchy to soothe Trump's vanity, why should anyone ever again criticise Meghan for launching a brand, or Harry for signing a media deal? Which is really more embarrassing, a duchess selling wine that sells out in hours, or a king selling his crown to a wannabe strongman? Exactly. Royalist. The Windsors debased themselves for Donald Trump's state visit bad news. I think they've pumped so many drugs into Donald Trump, he now looks somewhat healthier than King Charles. I would feel bad about saying that, except I remember Charles's courtiers running around briefing the press about Joe Biden's age several years ago. Charles was pissed that President Biden didn't go to the coronation, remember that? So Charles made it all about Biden's age and health. Now Charles has been receiving cancer treatments for 19 months, and his mealy pallor makes Trump look hale and hearty. Of course, there are plenty of other parts to this state visit which are pretty disgusting. Trump is being feted and celebrated like a conquering king. He's a pathetic authoritarian hell-bent on destroying NATO, the European Union, and all post-war societal, cultural and economic advancements. I don't exactly blame Charles and the royals for this. This was decided by Downing Street and Keir Starmer's government to roll out the red carpet this way for Trump. But that didn't stop Tom Sykes from going off on his royalist Substack in a piece called Britain Grovels Before Trump, shamefully enabling this sick, destructive man. An excerpt. The United Kingdom shamelessly prostrated itself at the feet of Donald Trump on Wednesday morning, throwing a welcoming party for his state visit at Windsor, so lavish it looked less like diplomacy than ritual self-humiliation. No foreign leader has ever been greeted with this degree of ceremonial excess. The choreography was on the scale of Elizabeth II's funeral. Yet this was not grief but a spectacle, a genuflection staged for a man many Britons see as a wrecking ball aimed at the very post-war settlement the country once helped design. To those watching with clear eyes, it was nauseating. There was at least a grim honesty in the absurdity. Trump demands spectacle, and Britain, desperate to please, delivers. He wants to be king. Britain obliges. But in obliging, the UK reveals something darker about itself. That to keep America close, it will debase itself utterly, strip its traditions for parts, and hire out its monarch like a sex worker to soothe the vanity of a man who insists on being treated as sovereign. Royal ceremony is theatre, but this was a theatre that revealed far more than a sovereign nation should about its craven need to please a foreign leader who has done nothing to help Britain and plenty to harm it. From the Royalist Substack. Yeah, I agree with all of that. It's pathetic on both sides. Trump is a global embarrassment, and America will likely never recover from any of this. But I don't hold it against the UK for doing what they can to stay on Trump's good side. In fact, I think Starmer and many other European leaders have figured out their own ways to manipulate Trump and/or work around him. This is part of how they do that. They play to his vanity. They treat him like the most delicate and superficial strongman ever, because that's exactly what he is. So as always, let's stand with Harry and Meghan, the ones who never needed empty spectacle to prove their worth. The ones who chose dignity over debasement. The ones who remind us daily what real strength looks like. And before we wrap up, family, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you never miss a moment here on Royal Sussex Squad. And if you'd like to support the channel and keep our voices strong, consider hitting that super thanks button. Every contribution helps us keep shining the light of truth and defending Harry and Meghan against the lies. Because here we don't bow to hypocrisy. We stand tall with the Sussexes, always.